You would think that when a ship dies, it quietly disappears. Maybe it gets towed to some high-tech facility, stripped down by robots, and recycled in a clean, orderly fashion. That is not what happens. What actually happens is this. A ship that weighs tens of thousands of tons gets pointed at a beach in Bangladesh or India, and the captain runs it aground at full speed. Then hundreds of workers climb onto the wreck with blowtorches, and they take the entire thing apart by hand, piece by piece, deck by deck, until there is nothing left but sand. And this is not some fringe operation. Between 700 and 1,000 large ocean-going vessels are retired every single year. Around 90% of them end up on beaches across South Asia. A single large oil tanker can contain over 30,000 tons of recyclable steel. Multiply that across an entire global fleet, and you start to understand why this is not waste management. This is commodity trading on a massive scale. The ship recycling industry is worth billions, and almost nobody talks about it. To understand how we got here, you need to understand one thing first. A ship is not just a vehicle. It is a floating financial asset, and like every asset, it has an expiration date. The typical commercial vessel has an economic lifespan of about 20 to 30 years. After that, the math stops working. Fuel efficiency drops, maintenance costs climb, insurance premiums spike, and newer ships with better technology start undercutting you on every route. But the real accelerant came in 2020 when the International Maritime Organization enforced a sulfur cap on ship fuel emissions. Overnight, thousands of older vessels became dramatically more expensive to operate. Owners faced a choice: spend millions retrofitting aging ships with exhaust scrubbers, or sell the whole thing for scrap. A lot of them chose scrap. Here is the part most people miss. The scrap value of a large vessel is not pocket change. It can represent anywhere from 5 to 20% of the ship's total lifetime earnings. That is tens of millions of dollars for a single hull. So when freight markets crash and charter rates drop, scrapping a ship is not a surrender. It is a calculated financial move. But a shipping company does not just drive its own vessel onto a beach. That is where the middlemen come in. They are called cash buyers, and they operate in one of the strangest corners of global finance. A cash buyer purchases a ship as is, often for millions of dollars up front. A large container ship carrying 15,000 containers might sell for $20 to $30 million, depending on the current price of steel. The sale is usually priced per light displacement ton, which is essentially the weight of the ship itself, minus any cargo or fuel. Once the cash buyer owns the vessel, they arrange a final voyage. The ship's flag is often changed to a more permissive registry. The crew takes it on one last trip across the ocean, headed for a demolition yard. The cash buyer then waits, hoping that steel prices do not crash before the ship is fully dismantled and sold. Because that is the gamble. These middlemen are not shipping experts. They are commodity speculators. They are betting millions on what steel will be worth 3 to 6 months from now. Some of them make enormous profits. Some of them lose everything on a single vessel. Now the obvious question: why does almost all of this happen in South Asia? Why India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan instead of shipyards in Rotterdam or Busan? The answer is not complicated. It is cheap. Labor costs in Chittagong, Bangladesh, or Alang, India, are a fraction of what they would be in Turkey or Northern Europe. Beaching is the method where a ship is simply run aground on a tidal flat, and it requires almost no permanent infrastructure. No dry docks, no cranes, no expensive environmental containment systems. Just a stretch of coastline, a high tide, and a workforce willing to do extremely dangerous work for very low wages. And the economic impact is enormous. Bangladesh alone sources up to 50% of its domestic steel from recycled ships in some years. That steel feeds directly into the country's construction industry. Apartment buildings, bridges, roads, all built from the bones of cargo ships that once crossed the Pacific. Alang, on the western coast of India, has recycled more than 10,000 ships since the 1980s. It is one of the largest ship recycling operations on Earth, stretching along miles of beachfront. From the air, it looks like a graveyard. Massive hull sections jutting out of the sand, surrounded by workers and cutting torches. But here is where it gets really interesting. It is not just the steel that has value. A large ocean vessel is basically a floating city. It contains hull steel, obviously, but also diesel engines the size of houses, miles of copper wiring, generators, navigation electronics, furniture, kitchen equipment, lifeboats, fire suppression systems, and even the paint on the hull contains recoverable metals. Roughly 95% of a vessel can be reused or recycled. Almost nothing goes to waste. The hull steel gets cut into manageable sections, loaded onto trucks, and driven to local re-rolling mills where it is melted down and reformed into construction-grade rebar and plate steel. The engines get refurbished and resold. The copper gets stripped and sent to metal dealers. Even the wooden furniture from the crew quarters gets sold in local markets. And this creates a fascinating economic dynamic. Ship recycling does not follow the shipping cycle. It follows the commodity cycle. When global steel prices spike, scrapping surges because the raw material is suddenly worth more. When steel prices drop, fewer ships get broken because the margins disappear. Cash buyers and yard owners are not watching shipping news. They are watching iron ore futures and scrap metal indexes. If you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. I cover hidden industries and global trade every week. Now let us talk about the part that makes this industry so controversial. Because behind the economics, there is a much darker reality. A large commercial ship is not just steel and copper. It also contains asbestos insulation, oil sludge, toxic anti-fouling paint, heavy metals, PCBs, and other hazardous materials that were perfectly legal when the ship was built 25 years ago, but are now classified as dangerous waste. At a properly regulated dismantling facility in Turkey or Europe, these materials are contained, removed, and disposed of according to strict environmental protocols. On a tidal beach in Chittagong, they often are not. Workers in some yards operate without adequate protective equipment. Toxic substances seep into the sand and the water. Accidents involving falls, fires, and structural collapses are not rare. The international community has tried to address this. The Basel Convention regulates the movement of hazardous waste across borders. The Hong Kong Convention, adopted in 2009, was specifically designed to improve ship recycling standards worldwide, but enforcement remains uneven. The European Union maintains an approved list of recycling facilities, and most South Asian beaching yards do not qualify. And yet, the ships keep coming. The economics are overwhelming. Everyone wants cheap steel. Nobody wants to pay for clean recycling. The countries where this work happens need the jobs and the raw materials too badly to shut it down entirely. It is one of those problems where every side has a point and nobody has a solution. Here is another twist that most people do not expect. Ship owners do not only scrap broken down, rusted out hulks. Sometimes they scrap ships that still work perfectly fine. After the post-COVID shipping boom, freight rates eventually came back down. Suddenly, owners who had been printing money with older vessels found themselves staring at a new reality. Fuel standards were tightening. The newest mega container ships could carry twice the cargo at half the fuel cost per unit. Charter rates favored modern, efficient fleets. Insurance and compliance costs for aging tonnage were climbing every quarter. So even though these ships could technically sail for another 5 or 10 years, the math said, scrap them now, while steel prices are still decent. Sell the asset, Reinvest in newer tonnage. Let someone on a beach in Gujarat turn your old Panamax into apartment buildings. It is ruthlessly practical, and it happens more often than you would think. So what does the future look like? Is this industry going to clean itself up, or is it just going to keep operating the way it always has? The honest answer is somewhere in between. Turkey has been gaining market share by offering pier-based dismantling, which is significantly cleaner and safer than beaching. Major shipping lines like Maersk and CMA have publicly committed to greener recycling pathways. Banks and cargo owners are increasingly demanding environmental, social, and governance compliance, which means responsible ship disposal is becoming a condition of doing business, not just a nice-to-have. But South Asia still dominates on price. And in an industry where margins are thin and competition is brutal, price wins more often than principles. The tension between ethics and economics is not going away anytime soon. If anything, it is getting sharper. And that tension is what makes this industry so fascinating. Because every single product you have ever ordered online, every barrel of oil that crosses an ocean, every car that gets exported from Japan to Europe, all of it rides on ships, and every one of those ships will eventually reach the end of its life. When it does, it will not be quietly retired. It will be driven onto a beach. Hundreds of workers will climb aboard, and over the course of weeks or months, they will take it apart with their hands, torch by torch, plate by plate. And every piece of it will be sold. That ending is worth billions. And now you know how it works. If you want to see how another hidden industry moves billions without anyone noticing, click the video on screen now.